The Snow Elves, also understood as the Falmer or Ice Elves, are an honored race of Mer with an extraordinarily immense predilection for magic. They gravitate towards snowy, isolated territories and occupied a fraction of Skyrim before being expelled by the Nords in the late Merethic era and early First Era. Preceding that, they had a civilization which contested even the Altmer of the Somerset Isles. They simulate white-haired, pale Altmer and have very long lifespans, as well as a strong protection against the cold. Tales tell that they prefer spears and archery in battle. Much as High Elf and Wood Elf are synonymous with Altmer and Bosmer respectively, Falmer is really just another word for Snow Elf. However, most individuals, even the Snow Elves themselves, establish an inclination for the term Snow Elf. In this circumstance, time ultimately administered disparate connotations for the two appellations. Many of the ancient Snow Elves were deceived in an arrangement for refuge they negotiated with the Dwemer. The Dwemer pushed their wards to survive only on a deadly fungi which shifted them into blind slaves. It is the grisly progeny of these slaves, whom other Snow Elves referred to as the Betrayed, who have come to portray the Falmer to many of the people of Tamriel. People often mention the imposing ancient race of Skyrim Elves as Snow Elves, and to their uncivilized fragments as Falmer. Few understand that an unknown count of cultured Snow Elves refused the Dwemer's arrangement. Even fewer understand that a few have endured, untainted into current times. Knight Paladin Gelibor of the Chantry of Auri-El, the only known and possibly last Snow Elf still alive today, accepted this differentiation between Falmer and Snow Elf because of the unfavorable implication Falmer had compiled over the millennia. It is not entirely known whether other Mer also occupied Skyrim, besides the subterranean Dwemer. Early tales are largely from Nordic context, which typically only specify to the Elves, without composing differentiations, but Elves in archaic Skyrim are considered to be Snow Elves in full or in part. The empire of the Snow Elves was extensive, upscale, and flourishing in the Merethic era. They demonstrated potential ahead of what could be understood at the time. However, they found themselves continually in clashes involving the Proto-Nords arriving from Atmora. The Nadic peoples either coexisted with or were dominated by the Elves and other territories of Tamriel. Only in Skyrim did relations succumb into an outright disagreement. It's not known when the dispute started. The most primitive human colonies in Tamriel date back to the Merethic era 800 to 1000, and sources imply the affair persisted to be comparatively peaceful for some time. Why the Elves of Skyrim provoked the Night of Tears is heavily discussed. Ascribed intentions include panic, doctrinal and militant incitement, territorial disagreement, and a motive to obtain an ancient powerful relic the humans had uncovered, the Eye of Magnus. Despite everything, the Elves invaded the human capital city of Sarthal one night and demolished it to the ground. The only known survivors of the attack were the Atmoran-born ruler Ysgramor, as well as his two sons Ingol and Ilgar. They escaped to Atmora only to come back to mainland Tamriel with revenge. Ysgramor's 500 companions massacred any elves they came across, opening the way for more pilgrims to travel behind their path. The Nords supposedly slaughtered the Snow Elves by the thousands. Their descendants maintain glorification of their ancestors' genocidal invasion against the Snow Elves. One of the most beloved songs in Skyrim is The Slaying of the Falmer Princes. After obliterating established elven opposition in Skyrim, the Nordic infantry hunted their enemy out on the Isle of Solstheim. The Elves made a last effort in the Battle of the Mosring. After an agonizing battle, their commander, the Snow Prince, was slain, and the Elves were conquered. The age of the Snow Elves was severed. Though they gradually lost territory, the Snow Elves had been securely embedded in Skyrim, and they endured into the early centuries of the First Era. In fact, the colossal yet well-hidden Chantry of Auri-El, a grand otherworldly and architectural accomplishment even by modern norms, hadn't even been built by the Snow Elves until the early First Era. It was not until the reign of High King Harald, First Era 143 to 221, that the Elves were supposed to have been driven from the current borders of Skyrim, though the Snow Elves remained to obscure themselves in the newfound Nordic Commonwealth. The Snow Elves had long cultivated an insecure coalition with the only other known faction of Mer who populated Skyrim, the Dwemer. The Nords instituted their dominance in Skyrim, and after the calamitous casualty of the Snow Prince, a majority of the Snow Elves turned to their subterranean elven cousins for sanctuary. After all, there were many Snow Elf tales praising the esteem and dignity of the Dwemer. The Dwemer proposed to supply them with shelter, but forced their precincts into enslavement, only permitting them to eat a deadly fungus which led to blindness. Over time, the servants became slaves. Ancient torture cells discovered in Dwemer ruins are supposed to have been utilized to keep their elven brethren in line. Some Snow Elves were able to avert becoming slaves to the Dwemer, instead departing to concealed temples or residing with sympathetic families. Over 100 were at the secluded Chantry of Auri-El when the Dwemer made their proposal, and by the time word of it reached them, they were too late to put an end to it. These few surviving Snow Elves look upon their corrupted brethren with condolence. However, this disposition was not equally felt by the Falmer, as they assailed their uncorrupted cousins with the same bloodthirstiness that they arrayed towards the other surface-dwelling races. Over the eras, the Snow Elves fell into fable. One of the first authentic example of documentation corroborating that the Snow Elves had indeed existed was the uncovering of the Snow Prince's remains in Yolgir Barrow on the island of Solstheim in the 3rd era 427. Lineage of the Snow Elves may exist in the blood of Myr of modern times, as it's alluded that many interbred with other elves before they terminated their existence as an identifiable society. The Skald considered that the Weaklings of Solstheim are the progeny of the Snow Elves, although scholars disagree and claim that they are merely a type of snow goblin. The bizarre race understood as ice warriors, discovered in the polar caves of Glacier Crawl, were also believed to possibly be residuum of the Snow Elves. These entities are unsociable with outsiders, but the icy blue-skinned humanoids suit the depiction of the ancient Snow Elves. The stronghold town of Dawnstar was once attacked by the Glacier Tribes, or Ice Tribes. These were blue-skinned humanoids that had domesticated trolls and the terrifying Gehennoth as war beasts, and had conspired with the disloyal champion of the settlement. Some legends tell of Wismothers being the last fragments of the Snow Elves. By the 4th era 201, what was once notion had become, more or less, familiarity. The heightened activity of the subterranean Falmer made it progressively more challenging to expel them as myths. It is believed that their activities linked to a prepared aggression of the surface world. Other elves are repelled by the concept that these Falmer were once Myr like themselves, and many ponder whether these creatures are truly all that is left of the mythical Snow Elves. Around this time, the great statue of Erkingthand, constructed in secret by the Betrayed, was uncovered by the Thieves' Guild. It was possibly the only known portrayal of the ancient Snow Elves. However, when the thieves extracted the eyes of the Falmer, which are large gems with incredible profit, it caused the cave to give way, entombing this invaluable paragon. Next to nothing is known of Snow Elf culture, other than that it compared to that of the Altmer. They upheld communication with other elven kingdoms. They established an elaborate and almost illegible written language. Only a few individuals in Tamriel can even perceive their alphabet, let alone interpret it, making it an excellent cipher for anyone with the appropriate insight planning to encrypt their writings. They evolved their own approach of telling time, and brilliant architectural accomplishments, among other things. The Altmer and Snow Elf pantheons relatively overlap, perhaps entirely. Both recognize Auri-El as the dominant deity and worship Trinimac, Ciribane, Y'ffre, and Finester. They had chapels to all of them, though none were as extraordinary as their Chantry of Auri-El. Their scripture references young ones and old ones, though how clear-cut this distinction is and its connotation in their culture is not known. Many of the most committed Snow Elves once dedicated themselves to a strenuous pilgrimage through the colossal Chantry of Auri-El, bearing with them the preeminent devotion to become one with their god, Auri-El. After it was assembled in the fabled Forgotten Vale of western Skyrim, the Chantry promptly became the focal point of the Snow Elf theology. The sanctuary was constructed for those who desired to become enlightened. Initiates arrived through the Chantry through a cavern characterizing the lack of enlightenment, and transported a liturgical ewer to each of the way shrines, small shrines of prayer which were dispersed throughout the Chantry, which were utilized for both rumination and transport. Each shrine was maintained to by a prelate, who informed the initiates on the chants that they were supposed to deliver. After sojourning to the way shrines of illumination, learning, resolution, radiance, and sight, and lowering the ewer into the water basin of each, the initiates lastly reached the inner sanctum at the end of their expedition, and had consultation with the archcurate, a snow elf who corresponded candidly with Auri-El. The only known archcurate was Verther, brother of Gelabor, who was contaminated with vampirism by an initiate around the time of the Snow Elves' collapse, and consumed millennia conspiring retribution against Auri-El for tolerating this to happen. Though all set out with the bravery to demonstrate their worth, few initiates were qualified for the tests and trials of the Chantry. The Wayfarers clashed not only with the raw elements of the hazardous veil the Chantry was constructed in, but with innumerable tests upon their faith and devotion. There was great honor for those who prevailed, and great dishonor and analysis for those who did not. But the legends of those who arrived at the inner sanctum are not without their portion of suffering. It is said that upon their entry, many were sheer husks of the individual they had once been. Some were quite delirious from insomnia and famished to the point of frailty. By the closure of their expedition, The miracle that they had courage yet to bear their receptacle and climb the steps of the temple was the last true confirmation of their faith. Despite each individual story, the concluding words linger to be strangely parallel. It is told that every crusader escalated, doused in light, and with a look of relaxation and complacency on their face. The Falmer are visionless, twisted descendants of the ancient Snow Elves that are deep-seated below the expanse of Skyrim. They are understood to hunt and assault infiltrators in distinct subterranean territories, chiefly in Dwemer ruins. Travelers can often immediately tell when the Falmer occupy a place thanks to their scent, which is told to be revolting. They've been understood to emerge to the surface to attack the ignorant. They are more or less man-sized, but stooped over and ugly, looking like beings of goblin kind more than their own mer precursor. They have no noses, only long crevices for nostrils. Their ears are sharply pointed, their skin pale and almost translucent, and their eyes barren, beady, and black. The Falmer were able to acclimate to life underground, but have lost the elegance the Snow Elves had portrayed. For attire, they wear only rags and leathers. They reside in tents and huts, operate traps to defend their expanse, keep chorus as livestock, and use irregular weaponry and apparatus. Some still exhibit an inclination for magic. Perhaps most remarkably of all, somehow their souls have lessened, unlike all other mer. Not are all of their souls the same capacity, and one does not require a black soul gem to confiscate one of their souls. Under captivity to the Dwemer, the betrayed ultimately revolted, leading to the legendary War of the Crag which ensued below Skyrim for decades, while the Nords overhead remained unaware. This war doubtlessly ended around the First Era 700, when the Dwemer race dissolved from the face of Nirn. While these Snow Elves are concluded to have been rendered blind by the Dwemeri fungi, it's unknown whether this toxin is exclusively subject for converting the betrayed to their present state. Some believe that it took many years for them to be totally corrupted. With the Dwemer absent, it was just a matter of time before the Falmer rediscovered their old adversaries on the surface. Falmer invasions to the surface world became accepted tales, and the Nords increased to blame them for almost every occurrence of tragedy. Nordic tales tell of these goblin-like creatures ascending up from the ground in the dead of night to butcher cattle, contaminate crops, assault reclusive commuters, and kidnap sleeping infants from their cribs. They use domesticated chorus, a venomous chitin-covered insect discovered in the deepest territories of Skyrim, for many of their uses. According to Gelebor, they have an immense hostility for all but their own race, and incarcerate the very few they do not murder. However, Knight Paladin Gelebor recognized them as mournful and corrupted beings. Gelebor distrusted that the Dwemeri toxin was adequate to cause their shift, and believes that other forces may have been at play. While he distrusted the ideas that they could be legitimately cured, he had noted an acceleration in their acumen over the years, and he cherished on the idea that they could once again rebound to the light and the worship of Auri-El. While their intuition may be growing, the Falmer have still tested unable to pick many of the more complex Dwemer locks.